For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerd Steve, and today I'm hanging out with Gabe Hicks. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good. It is a nice day in PA. I hate that I rhymed. Um, but it's a good day so far. I actually woke up early this morning. I had a proper breakfast. I had coffee. I don't know what's happening, but I'm gonna ride this wave all day.
Nice. Here it is. We are witnessing Faye. Although the thunder and the lightning has calmed down at least. So, if the stream just
Preferably.
dies for some reason, folks, that is why. Yeah, but what are you gonna do? That's all right. The lawn needs to be mowed, and I don't want to do it anyway.
That's fair. Get that.
It's not one of my favorite things for sure. The outside is not one of my favorite things for sure.
That's also fair.
You know what? I worked in construction, probably in and around that industry from the time I was in my teens till I was like 40. So I've had enough outside. And I always worked worked so many jobs where it was like you still worked even if it rained. It just meant like you were soggy and miserable. So I've seen enough of the sun. But we're here to talk about games and stuff. And I am fascinated by this concept of a Goblin Dating Sim that you're working on and how that came about.
Oh my gosh. It was one of those moments where it is like late at night and it's like one in the morning and I'm like, I want to play something weird. I want to play something weird and strange. Goblin Dating Sim. And then I put it up on Twitter and I went to sleep and then I woke up and my notifications were on fire. Like people asking like, how do we make this happen? Like, oh, I know a writer. Oh, I love doing art stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I guess I'm making this thing.
Yeah.
Um,
How big is the team for that?
so the team was initially 6 people and now it is 13.
Oh, it has grown.
Yes, yeah. It grew and thankfully it grew after I realized we had more money to work with than I thought. I had budgeted like very low and then planned out from there, like of what we could and had to use. And as like we had reached everything that we needed and we made more money than expected, I'm like, okay, I can hire more people so I don't have to do as much and that we can get this done on time and or sooner than later. So there's about 4 concept artists. I think there's 5 other writers right now. And then there is one of the concept artists who works as also a background artist. And then there's like a sprite artist. So that it's a pretty varied team. Some of them are working on the like goblins backstories or more origins. Some of them are working on downtime events that happen in between the dates, so to speak. And the main focus of the play is that it plays a lot like a tabletop role-playing game where you have different stats. You have strength, intelligence, charisma, and dexterity. And there's a specific number in the top right that's like 5, 10, 8, whatever it is. And then the game generates a number between 1 and 10 or 1 and 20. And then it adds your value for like strength to that number. And then it's like, if it's above this number, it's a success. If it's below this number, it's a fail. And the success or fail doesn't change a huge portion of the story per se, but it does give you different insights. So it is a branching left, right, like forward, depending on the success or fail. And you might learn something important from a fail that you wouldn't have got from a success. You'll still get something from a success, but the idea is that even if it's considered a failure, it doesn't mean that you lost something per se. You might not have just gotten everything that you would have with the success.
So is this an RPG essentially? Because I just saw it. I honestly didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was like going to be a video game or a tabletop game or what. But so it is. It's an RPG. And what would you say the core premise of the game is?
Um, Dating goblins, like it's because it's like the interactive book kind of genre, but there is events in between every so or few days, and there's like a day system that the game tracks. And the events are also on a random generated system. So if you decide you're going to go to the market, it's going to pull one of the random market scenes in there and put it in. That way, someone who plays through the game with the same character's route, or two people that say play the same character's route, most likely won't have the same experience. And some of the things that on random generation, it'll actually trigger another event during downtime. So if you're like, I went here and met this goblin named Greg who gave me a weird knife. The next time you go to the market, you can make sure you trigger the next scene with Greg. And it's like, hey, I gave you that knife. I need it back. There's blood on it. And then it's like, what the hell is happening? Because it's not even the main story, but it's weird enough that it's like, you remember that. You remember,
Yeah.
I'll remember Goblin Greg who gave me a knife and then needed it back because of blood.
Now, are you a goblin, or are you just seeking to date goblins?
So you're just seeking to date goblins. I never defined what the player looked like, specifically because I'm like, I know there's going to be people that make fan art, and they're going to want to make fan art of their own characters, and I'm going to let them do it. If they want to say they are a gigantic ogre man dating tiny green people, I'm not here to tell you no.
Who's in charge of writing romantic goblin dialogue?
So technically that was me. And then I was like, I've written a lot of weird stuff. I want to focus on just putting it into the game now. So I left it to 3 others, and some of the stuff they've come up with is great, but I'm like, oh, this is so weird. Like it's a lot of puns, it's a lot of funny stuff, and then some of it also gets like almost dark. Because depending on the character's story, they all have different moods. One of them is sincerely lighthearted and open and like, just trying to be happy. One of them, characters can die depending on choices that you make, which isn't usually like something that happens in dating games.
Yeah, but that's regular dating games. You've never clearly dated
true.
goblins before.
That's exactly right. And there's a lot of references
Yeah.
of the stuff that I care about or like in the game. A year ago when I had started development, I went to Matt Mercer and asked if I could include Tusk Love, the orc romance orc from Critical Role in it. He was like, yeah, sure. So one of the characters is named Oscar after the orc from Tusk Love.
Yeah, nice.
And like there's like a little snippet of like of the story that I made up and put inside that you can like go to the library area and read some stories that we just have collaborated on. It's one of the weirdest things I've ever made, and every time I play it, I'm like, this is fun, and it's supposed to be fun, but it's weird that like I'm glad I can enjoy it as someone who made it. And then I got to watch someone play through the newest version of the demo yesterday. And as she was playing through, like her and her chat were having a great time, and I was like telling them all like little hints and secrets of stuff that was happening, but they were just absolutely losing their mind. And they're like, I get to which one are we smooching? And they were just like, everyone was talking about who they were going to go for. Like, I like the beefy one. Oh, but her abs are amazing. Why is that one called Stab?
Yeah. It could be a red flag in a budding relationship when the person you're trying to date's name is Stab.
Yep, and Stab is one of the romanceable goblins. Because the premise is also, you'll find out, like in the story early on, all of the goblins named themselves. But then the question is, why did he name himself Stab? And you'll find out pretty quickly. It's a really weird conversation. Ironically, that is the one that I voice, and I wasn't intending to, but the writing team was like, Gabe, you've done this voice before. That's who we hear. And I'm like, all right, I'll do it. And then I didn't write Stab's lines. I wrote Stab's general story. So as I'm like reading his lines, I'm like, Haley, why did you write this? Because it was funny.
Oh man, can you give us a little bit of Stab?
I don't understand why you're bleeding, but I don't really know how to stop it either. We could put the knife back in.
Like he's dense.
Yeah.
But he's dangerous, and that almost makes it better and worse at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. Is there any goblin speed dating?
Kind of. Because in the very beginning, you get to go on like a little date kind of thing with each of them, get to know them, and try to charm them. And you can fail on charming them. very early on in the game, you essentially come into the area by falling through a portal, and I don't remember which character it is, but when you try to charm them, you use a pickup line. Your pickup line is, "Did you fall out of the sky? Because I did." And on the failure, the person literally just looks at you and then just leaves without saying anything.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, and you get a chance to really to see how each of their personalities are and how they all react and talk. And all of the main 8 do have voice actors, which was another reason that I hired more people, because I was also doing like the sound design and the editing, and that was a mistake because I forgot what sleeping was for like 2 months.
Happens.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as fun as that is, I could probably just spend an hour talking about dating goblins.
That's fair.
It's so weird, but
Yes.
fun.
Yes, that's my brand.
But what are some other things people might know that you've worked on, or let people know some things you've worked on.
So I made the thing for 5e recently, which is the class modifier module. It is a free download that is kind of a pay what you want. The art is done by Rachel Denton at Tallinier, Tallinier, who's a fantastic artist. I came up with it because I wanted to make a supplement for Dungeons and Dragons that allowed me to narratively have my paladin be stronger, or my sorcerer be more charismatic, or explain why my warlock does have a higher charisma to pull things in like that. And I talk about in that, like, if you're a warlock, you are trying to garner support from your patron. So that would be a reason that you would have an ability score increase in charisma. Or as a barbarian, you have trained your body to be physically more durable, which is why you would have a higher constitution score. So it was using that instead of pulling from like the race that the character is to the class, and then treating it as if they've trained in those things. And then also use it for like a narrative tool. So each class has a 3-step, and 1 step is giving you an increase between this ability score or this one. So like this one may be strength or dexterity. The next step could be con or dexterity. And the final one is con or strength. And I did it in that specific design so that either you could increase all of your abilities in that class by 1, or you could increase 1 by 2 and another by 1, which is something that we saw in a lot of the ability score increases in general. And that I worked on that for about 2 months. Originally, I released just 4 classes to see if there was interest in it. There was way more interest than I ever expected. And then it kind of took off. So I was able to hire Rachel to do more work. And it's been a fantastic experience. I've seen them use it on Roll20 shows. They've used it on some of the official D&D shows. I've seen dozens and dozens of people use it in their streams, their home games. I've gotten literally emails from people excited about using it, or saying that they used it for building up strength for their NPCs in their stories, because then it gave them more narrative, it gave them a reason to add to their abilities. And then seeing people take that and then use it for even some of their own custom classes that they've made and branch off with it. It's been hugely humbling and an amazing experience, and just from 2 months.
So is it something that changes the existing mechanics or adds to them?
It changes a little bit. So if, for example, if you are a elf, I don't know if you were a tiefling, because I think tieflings get a +2 to charisma, if I remember correctly.
The int and charisma, I think that charisma is the high one, yeah.
Yes. So instead of getting the +2 and +1 with the tiefling, instead it would be dependent on the class that you would pick. And the abilities like Hellish Rebuke are still there, but it's just changing the ability score increases from the race and putting them to the class instead, and giving you a choice of how you distribute it.
Okay, I gotcha. So yeah, so you're just swapping out. So you're swapping out the racial adjustments and making them class based instead.
Yep. Yeah, because if I remember correctly, the paladin is, I think it's strength, constitution, and charisma. And so if you were a tiefling paladin, instead of just getting the +2 to charisma and +1 to int, you would be able to pick, okay, am I going to have a +2 in strength, a +2 in charisma, a +2 in constitution, or do I just want to have +1 across the board? Because maybe my rolls make that significantly easier to actually work with.
Okay, so it just kind of gives a little bit more flexibility in that by switching it out to the class instead of the race.
Yep.
Which
and one of the reasons I like that is because usually people pick their character race first and then their class second. So I didn't want to make the race that they pick pretty much decide what class they were going to pick.
So I mean, is there any fear with that though, that it's going to, like, stat wise, it's just going to make all of the classes the same? Like everyone's going to just, like, buff their most important stat. And so, like, every paladin is just gonna, obviously, whether you're a dwarf or a halfling or a human, you're just gonna put it in whatever you perceive to be the most important one. So all the class stats are gonna line up and look kind of the same.
There's never been any fear for that because that happens with the races, but you don't have a choice in that. This thing is a choice. If they do that, that's an active choice. But if you pick the race and it gives you a +2 strength, you never get that choice. A prime example is orcs, who get a -2 intelligence, which makes playing an orc wizard significantly harder. So I'd even argue that it gives you more options to play it in a way that doesn't feel like you're losing something.
Yeah, I mean, so Volo's guide was very bizarre in the sense that they reintroduced negatives back into the game after 5e had taken them out for the playable races, which was just kind of, our group found it to be dumb just because it went against their own design. And it's like, why did you single out just these two races to give them the penalties, right? Orcs and kobolds were the only ones. Like, even goblins are significantly better. Like, they didn't. I think with goblins they don't get 2 stats, but they didn't get any penalties either. I could also be wrong on that. So, and then all the other monstrous ones that they introduced as hey, we don't know that these are balanced, but you can use them, all followed the same core ethos of the rest of the races, which made no sense to us. And then they kind of like fixed it in Eberron and Wildmount.
So I'll ask you a question then. Do you think it makes more sense for a orc wizard who has spent years studying to be a wizard to still just have a +2 to strength and not have a +2 to intelligence?
So my thing with, like, first of all, they shouldn't be called races because they're not. Yes. Like to call
They're
them
species.
Yeah, they're all different species. It's so I think that word trips people up, and they want to compare it to people in the real world because in the real world it doesn't matter. We're all mostly the same, right? The margin of difference is so small. But, like, to me, when you take a D&D race, it's like comparing a bear to a person. Right? So that's why I think the race stats are kind of fine. Like, if you got
if you're a wizard, you're not practicing your strength. You wouldn't keep that.
Well, that's true. But you could still have a natural inclination just because you were born with a higher, more muscles than someone else.
Would you not have to maintain that?
To a certain extent, but there is always a baseline. You could have a higher baseline. So, like, but that being said, right, that's why your orc, who's weak for orcs, has a 10, right, which is average for humans. But so, and when you're talking about races that are much closer together, like, it's a harder argument, right? But then what about a Minotaur and a Halfling, right? Like, obviously the Minotaur is much bigger and much stronger. Even if he's the runt of the litter, right? He's still going to be much stronger because he's like 7 foot tall and the Halfling is 3 foot tall.
That has nothing to do with my class, though, because that's how they distribute their stats. All my thing does is give them a chance to increase something based on the class. I'm not deciding how they distribute it, which is more of what I think you're talking about.
Yeah. Oh, no. I'm just saying that's why, to me, the race stats, I don't have a problem with the way they are. I also don't have a problem with alternate methods of doing it as well, right? And, there's room for both in the game, And as always, we always believe that every table should play the game however they want, right? It doesn't matter what Wizards of the Coast say or Paizo says or anybody. Really, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that the group that you're playing with can come up with a consensus of, this is how we want to play. This is what is fun for our group. So having other options out there is great, and other takes on it. It's just like I don't know. I've heard the term that stats in D&D are racist. Now, I think the negatives are stupid because like that goes away from the design that they're doing. Why would you just pigeonhole like these two races? But overall, I just think the term has to change. They're not races; they're species, and some of them are very, very different from each other if you line them all up. Yes, when you get to like orc, elf, dwarf, human, they're much closer. But when you start going, well, Luxodon, Minotaur, Centaur, their physiologies are so different to me that it just makes sense that they would have natural inclinations. Now, when you talk about more like things that are based on cultures, yeah, that doesn't make as much sense, because if there's a divergent, like you have orcs or elves or whatever, and they have different cultures than maybe from Eberron to Faerun to Greyhawk to your own homebrew, right? That would be different. They would be raised different. If you have primitive dwarves or elves, they're not going to be the same as someone raised in a society that has a lot more cultures, much more advanced. So I don't know. It's where we're at with the game, and like people are muddling through it. But I think the biggest thing is they just got to change the terminology and make it fit to what it actually is, instead of like this really archaic terminology that we have.
I think that's an entirely different conversation than my class module was about.
No, yeah, it probably is, and it's probably lengthy. Like I said, you're offering up another alternative a way of doing it, which I think is great. Like you make valid points where like, if you studied to be a wizard and raised as a wizard all your life, yeah, you would probably be better at doing these things. And I think like Pathfinder 2 kind of does that stuff too as well.
A little bit, yeah.
Which, although far more complicated, because we went through the character creation with that stuff, and it was just like all these different things. You had to have a much higher level mastery of the game to figure out your character when you were building it. Instead of being like, well, this is your class, we're just going to swap out your stats, and they're going to be geared to what that character does. So what else do you have in the works? Or, well, before we get to that, where can you find the alternate stats at, or the alternate modular for classes at?
You can, if you go to my Twitter page, there is a link in my bio that will take you to my links, and there is one that is go to my itch.io page. You can find it right there. It is a free download. The recommended purchase is $5, and basically half of that goes to me, and the other half goes to Rachel.
Sweet. So, when you decided to do that, how did that come about?
Which aspect?
The project in general. What was kind of like your inspiration for it?
I did not like feeling like when I picked a D&D race for a character, it was influencing the classes that I felt like I would be better at. Because for me, that's not fun.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I've always used it as I guess I never considered changing it. So a lot of times when I make characters in 5e, if you're going with kind of like the optimal race class combinations, that kind of informs your decisions. But when I decide to do unoptimal, I would always just do point buy, and I would just like have higher averages, and more likely I just wouldn't have a dump stat. So statistically for my characters, it ended up being different. You weren't the best at the particular things that you're usually good at, but you tended to be more better across the baseline, just not like that you weren't starting with those 2 16s and you ended up having to work into them. I hadn't considered changing it and switching it up to, basing it off the character classes. So narratively in the product, you like describe the process.
Yes. So one example is the rogue who has been caught. Are you focusing more on talking your way out, or are you focusing on getting out without being seen? Which is where it becomes a choice of, is it a +1 to charisma or is it a +1 to dex? And then it's also asking you the questions of like, how does your character approach these things? But then also giving a statistical reward for considering that.
So, what other stuff are you working on nowadays?
I'm working on 2 different systems of my own design. One is a superpowered based system, and the other is a Victorian Monster Hunter themed system. It's been a combination of about 7 different games that I've played and enjoyed, but either were incredibly difficult to get character creation done, like 2-3 hours, but that didn't even include the time that it would take to know what you're doing, versus things that I loved the character creation aspect and then didn't feel like it actually used things that came into play when making the character. So I've been making a single bigger system and then kind of splitting up different pieces of it to do those 2 things together.
So what does a Victorian Monster Hunter game look like? Sounds like fun.
So it is a tabletop game, and it is, if you think of Van Helsing meets more of Underworld, but still in a medieval setting. Given maps that are related to like a town, or specifically in the sewers, knowing that there are beasts and creatures all out, some that will be shape-shifting, some that will be turned themselves, and then it is taking that magic, taking that chaos, and either solely fighting against it or using it and harnessing it to shift their body to be able to turn into almost like werewolves and lycanthropes, those sort of characters, and fight against it, matching monster for monster.
Okay, so you're kind of like fighting fire with fire.
Yes.
Nice. So what is the core mechanic?
It's based on a success and failure system more than just rolling against. So the idea is, if you're familiar with 40K and how that is, I'd say that's a loose comparison for like the combat-esque. Rolling, and you have so many successes to see if that compares against your opponent's defense, different actions that can reduce it, but then also taking from games like, we talked about it a little bit earlier before cameras, Zweihander does it, XCOM does it, using an action point system, because I feel like it simplifies what people know they can or can't do. With a lot of games, you have different types of actions. You have quick, rapid, reactions, base actions, move actions, attack actions, regular actions. And it can be sometimes a little complicated if people are like, okay, well, I know I can do this. I did this one. Can I do this one? I think I did my bonus. I think I did my extra. And then it gets a little bit difficult. So if you have an action point system and they know I have 4 action points right now, and then just having like a small chart that lists what all of the general actions cost, then it's just keeping track of the cost rather than keeping track of what actions did you already do, can you do again. You're allowed to attack multiple times in the system if you have the action points to do it. It doesn't hinder you from like not doing anything so that you can attack 2 times, 3 times the next turn. But again, it's just to make it easier, so like instead of having to keep track of what types of actions did you already use up, what action points do you have that you can use to do any of these things you know you can do.
Is it like a round based system where, or like do the things set per like the round or per encounter, per combat?
Per round.
Okay, so you basically have a basket, and you can pick as much as you want from it, but once it's empty, it's empty.
Yes.
Nice. So so why are monsters hunting other monsters?
So I think it's the idea that the monsters have been able to hold on to or regain some of their humanity, and thus they are using it to stop the ones that have lost it. So if we even consider another good example would be like the Castlevania Netflix series, how there is the demonic creatures that are flying about, and then you have Alucard, who is a half vampire, or you had Dracula, who was a complete vampire lord and still had a sense of humanity when he had someone that he had loved. And it is possible for them to be like that, but it does not mean that everyone or most of them will be.
So the monsters are kind of still kind of clinging to their humanity. That is the idea. So is there any mechanics or anything in the game to like, if you do things, you can start losing your humanity. I think like Vampire used to do things like that.
Yep. Yeah, and then those will be rolls against it. The rolls will get harder. So I talked about the success system. There are circumstances where you actually lose dice to trying to roll for successes because it is harder to hold on to your humanity.
So are you always playing a monster against monsters, or can you also be like a vanilla human?
It's yeah. So there's the type of character is focused on the class, not focused on the background of the character themselves. So if you are someone who wanted to harness that side of it, and you wanted to say that was part of the backstory, there are multiple classes for that. Specifically, there are also there is a sniper class. There is a class that is focused around almost like a Nikola Tesla kind of thing, where you're harnessing electric coils and surging the energy through like a power glove.
Oh, okay. So it's class based. Is it also level based?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and the way the levels work is instead of having there are specific increases for the class that you pick, but there are also skills mainly. So you can pick skills to go into your class rather than just saying here are the skills that your class has that you get as you level up. Here are the skills that you can pick for your class to pull them in, so that if two people are playing snipers, they could be different types of snipers depending on what skills they chose.
Does the superhero game like work the same way?
Yep, very similar.
Okay. So if you learn one, you'd be able to pick up the others.
Yep. And the superhero game is designed around the sense narratively you can decide you have whatever power you want, and there's just mechanics for how to execute it inside of the game itself.
Okay. So making it more effect based?
Yes.
Okay. Eminem is similar in that regards with the powers. It's not a class system though. It's all like skill point. Did you like research a lot of Supers games while working on that?
Yep. I watched a lot of superhero games. I've watched so many shows about it just in general. I've watched My Hero Academia. I watched through Young Justice. I watched through Supergirl. I watched through Gotham. I watched through just pretty much any show that had a theme for heroes or powered people in any way. Just because it was like, even if there's one idea that I get from it that helps this be easier or make more sense, it's enough. And then it's like time that I'm still working and writing while I have it on.
So, during your research, what did you find anything in particular where it was really missing and you were going to be able to fill that need? Or is it just kind of like your take on things?
Well, originally it wasn't even that I wasn't going to have people pick a power and then narratively and mechanically work it. Originally it was going to be like, here's these types of powers and then you can choose from these types of powers and then this is how they're going to work and then you can have these skills to go with it. It was after I saw the different shows that I was like, well, there can be a dozen different people that can manipulate fire, but it doesn't mean they're going to do it in the same way. One person might manipulate fire and it allows them to literally fly. One person might manipulate fire and they can just shoot flames from their hands. Or another person can just douse themselves in fire, not burn from it, but then they can literally generate heat. So then I was like, so let me figure out ways that mechanically it works so that if two people have the same idea, they can still do it and it still feels like it's unique to them.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the super systems that do specific powers does kind of pigeon you in, especially like you said, when you start watching and reading and checking out, all the different media for heroes games, there are tons of ways, and then sometimes you even think of new ways that are maybe a little bit more interesting in order to use powers. Like what if you use electricity but you can only use it if you can conduct it through a metal source. Yep. You can come up with cool things like off the cuff like that where it's a new twist on an old idea.
Yep. And I have little notes about just coming up with what the power that you have is. I have notes about ways to implement restrictions and ways to reward role playing with restrictions, because I also when I've been making these games, instead of having like a separate book for the GM, it's including a specific chapter for the person running the game to have more ideas on ways to do it, suggestions to do it, things that I have tried that worked and are not ways that the game needs to be run, but that way they don't feel like they're going into a blind.
Makes sense. Guidance helps.
Yeah.
So are these games in playtest now? How complete are they?
They are, both of them are about halfway done. I've been getting design art for both of them for the last month or so, and I'll probably have, honestly, all of the art for both of them by November.
What is the most surprising Super's character that someone's presented to you that you hadn't like maybe thought of before?
He had acid reflux, and thus it allowed him to spit fire.
Yes.
I was like, what? All right. I mean, we can still make it work. We can still make, but it was so strange. And he's like, and you know what? I think I'm gonna take the flight scale so that he just burps so heavy that he just launches himself in the air. And I'm like, I mean, you made it make sense. I hate it, but you made it work.
Why are we doing this?
Yeah. It was like both joy and immediate regret.
Yeah. Although most people don't have control over their acid reflux.
That was where like some of the downsides came in, because he was like, well, we were talking about downsides. So if I don't roll any success on this kind of check, can we like use one of these downsides that we have listed? Yes, we can. So there was a time that he jumped out of a glass window about 4 stories up and wanted to propel himself down at the enemy using the flight skill, and so he rolled the check to make sure everything was fine, and he didn't roll any successes, so he launched himself back into the room, because the disadvantage was if you're trying to go one direction, you automatically go the opposite direction at the same speed. I'm like, you literally jump out and then burp yourself back inside the room.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Nailed it.
Nice. What are these drawbacks you speak of?
So the drawbacks are so that depending on the universe people play in, superpowers don't really have any drawback. Like, for example, Wonder Woman doesn't really have very many weaknesses, and that's not a bad thing. But there are circumstances where you have, like Superman, who has kryptonite. So then it's giving the ability to play a Wonder Woman or a Superman. You don't have to have a weakness, but you can give yourself a weakness, and then in doing so, it gives you more points to choose skills, basically. So it's like you're taking a penalty so that you can have more, but you're not required to take the penalty.
Okay, that makes sense. The flaw system. I've seen those get abused quite a bit. There's quite a few games where people are like, I'm going to be a quadriplegic, blah, 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 and then use all the points to dump them, and then they find ways to like min-max and, power game away their drawbacks. How much consideration did you put in that direction?
A lot, because the flaws don't affect things as heavily in that sense. And the getting extra skills, it helps, but there's plenty of skills, so they might get 1 or 2 more skills to start, and their flaw could be that when they overuse their power, or if they use their power 3 times in a row, then they start overheating and need to cool down, or like their body temperature drops so low that they can't use it next time. So it's things that affect the choice that they're going to have to make, and they'll be able to use excessive force in their attack, which is why they do it. But then in doing that 3 times in a row, or not even like 3 rounds, but using their attack 3 times in like a 30-second period has that effect on their body, so then they have to suffer, and it's not something they can go against.
Gotcha. Do you do like kind of like narrative flaws, Peter Parker has you have your alternate identity life that you have to deal with, and responsibilities. Like in the old Marvel superheroes game, there was a karma system, and like if you didn't take your little brother to the movie, you might like you promised, you might lose 5 points of karma.
Yeah, like so one of them I had was Paragon of Truth, which meant that the character could not lie, which can be horrible. but it also means that it's fun narratively because it's not saying they have to tell the truth per se. It just means they can't lie. I have an idea who the Flash may be. Are you the Flash? It's possible. So they can't say no, but they could get around it, and then it adds more of a comical aspect depending on the person who's playing.
Yeah, definitely. They're fey.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yep.
Hold this iron horseshoe.
Yeah.
Do you have a preferred genre to create for?
I don't actually. The first tabletop game I ever made was a cyberpunk tabletop role-playing game. So I like having multiple genres just because I like figuring out what world I want to play in today. Two of my favorite games are from Bethesda, Fallout and Skyrim. And very different genres, but I like the open world experience and being able to run around in post-apocalyptic wasteland. Awesome. Having to run from a giant dragon, also awesome. So it really just depends on the day, and having more options to do it. I think I've realized I like to play different games during the week because then I feel like I'm getting something different. If I'm playing in 2-3 D&D games or just 2-3 fantasy-based games, it's not that it's harder, but sometimes they blend together, and then it makes it either harder to remember specific details for me, or it makes it harder to separate my brain. So if this one game I'm working on is fantasy, then when I'm working on the Victorian thing, it's okay, you know what? I'm in this mindset. This is a good idea for that thing. I can write it and save it for later.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Even just whether you're talking about design or just playing, right? If you're playing 7 different fantasy characters, at some point, like you said, they're going to blend together. But, if you're playing, hard science fiction and a superheroes game and a fantasy game and, a gumshoe detective game, they're going to all have different feels, and it'll be easier to separate those characters.
Yep, exactly.
Or maybe you just make the same character in different genres. I don't know.
That's possible. I know people that do that.
Yeah. They're all alternate realities of the same character. Are you playing many games these days?
I was in 4 different streams for about 3 months, and now I'm not in any because I needed a break.
Yeah, I get that.
I was playing a game of Zweihander. I was playing D&D. I was playing the Witcher tabletop role-playing game, and then I was playing another D&D game, but it was actually more of a home game. And then there was something else that I was streaming. Oh, and then I was in a Tales from the Loop game. And some of them were 2 a day, and it was fun being in so many things. But then it was just okay, that was a lot. If I do play in a game, maybe 1 or 2, because then I can focus on it and not have to think about, oh, gotta change my mindset. Tomorrow I'm a detective, and then, oh, gotta change my mindset. In 3 hours, I'm a child.
That is a lot. Sometimes I see people streaming, and I'm like, maybe I just don't like games as much as I thought. Because they're that's 7 days, 8 games. I'm like, that's a lot. It's just not. It wouldn't be fun for me anymore.
It starts to feel like work.
It does start to feel like work, and also there's a big difference between playing in stream games and just playing in games with your friends. Whether it's in person, online, or whatever. We actually used to record all of our games and put them up, and then we just stopped. We just went back to playing the way we normally do, and then occasionally we're in stream games, which I think I prefer that. We run some on our channel, but then we make sure we keep some that are just us playing games.
That makes sense. It's a good way to do it because then you have a balance.
Yeah. Yeah, because even though it's fun when you're streaming, it's still kind of work, right? And you play the game differently, I feel, than you would if you're just playing with your friends around the table. You have an audience to think about, and you want to be entertaining. Mm-hmm. So, they're all factors.
Yeah.
So, are you playing any games offline now? Not non-stream, not offline.
Yeah. So I am playing in a technically I'm running a small campaign for my hero system, and that has been fun. Other than that, none right now. I'm probably going to start up actually a game of werewolf that I was talking about with a few other people recently, and we found a person to run the game who loves the storyteller system. So we've been like talking about that, getting the world together, like figuring out the narrative, and so that's probably going to be something that we start delving into soon.
The supers game you're running, where is it? Where is it set?
So it's set in literally just a world where superpowers are common. It's not uncommon, but for people to be able to have stronger than normal abilities. But the level to their strength is more like mundane. Like if someone had 4 arms, it's not that strange because the superhero mutation. But for someone to be able to fly and literally like lift a building is still kind of astounding. So these characters are characters that are considered part of like a third generation where their abilities have manifested in more dramatic ways. And they are not the only ones who manifested as part of the third generation. There are people who have artificially enhanced their abilities and then use that to take advantage of characters in the cities that they know are significantly weaker.
That makes me think of Wild Cards a little bit. I don't know if you're familiar with that series, where you had like your superheroes, and then you had others that were like they had superpowers, but not really. They weren't They weren't that impressive. It was just more out of the norm from what people could do. And then you had the Jokers, who were they were more like deformities, but sometimes they would also manifest powers to go along with them. Like you might look like a big troll, that would be considered a Joker, but you're a big troll, so you have big troll strength. So
Yeah.
there's a question from Michael. Wants to know when will the games be released?
So I should have playable demos released in November.
And where will you be releasing them?
I'll probably be releasing those on itch.io as well, but I'll be making sure I put like links up and updates on Twitter.
Cool. Have you been doing any? Have there's been any streams of those games?
Not yet. There probably will because I have been recording the home games, and at some point I'm either going to put up on YouTube and or stream directly to Twitch the videos of them, and I like that a little bit because being able to record them and then put them up on Twitch allows me to do a lot of like back end stuff, adding in music, sound effects for the dramatic moments and stuff like that.
The pow and kapow.
Like, and then you hear an eruption from behind you.
Yeah, that's a lot of work though, especially for games. How long are the sessions?
Sessions are about 2 hours, but I have a background in sound design and sound editing, so this is like a hobby for me.
Okay, that does make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Because I have definitely done my fair share of editing, and I do not have a background in that.
Yeah.
So I could greatly appreciate someone who does.
Yeah.
Where do you want to go in the future? What kind of projects do you want to do? Do you have one that you haven't tackled yet that is in the future?
I have another digital game that I want to work on that's more of a tactical turn-based game, almost like Fire Emblem style. And I have a world that I've been every now and then like putting down ideas for it. I have characters, I have areas, I have occasionally commissioned art of like different things I have in mind for it, and then just I have it in like a folder. So at some point, I think that's going to be a next year project when the other major things that I've been working on now have settled. And then also I can take the funds from those things being out and done and then put that into this bigger digital game that I have.
Nice. Do you prefer GMing or playing?
I think I prefer playing. I prefer playing more now than I used to. I used to prefer GMing because it used to be very hard to find a group that I actively wanted to play with versus like being in a group because it was the only way to play a game.
Yeah.
But now that now with just social communication being significantly easier and the internet being as such, I do prefer being a player because then I don't have to think as much, I don't have to plan as much, and then when someone wants to tell the story and like wants to work together to tell the story, it's like 10 things less that I have to do, and then I can just sit back and enjoy being a part of it, or just enjoy watching it come together.
It is nice to be able to just show up and enjoy the game. Like, as players, rarely do we have to do very much prep work. I find like a lot of times when I'm playing, I want to run, and when I run, I want to play. I suffer from that a bit. Not so much more recently. I'd say probably like the last year or so, I've been mostly just playing and not haven't been running anything. I'm actually just about to start up a new D&D game because I've got the itch. It's time to run something and create.
Do it. It's the time to do it.
Yeah, but you know, I guess the other part of that is because like we do Nerdarchy, so we do publish some things, and you know we have the YouTube channel. Like we're always creating, so the running games and GMing for me was filling that void, right? That creative outlet. Except for now, like in the last 6 years, we've created like over 3,000 videos, and tons of content on the website, and a store for our products. I feel like I'm getting that part covered now, so I don't miss the running nearly as much.
Yep.
So I can definitely see how you'd rather play than run because you're already creating stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I like playing, especially after I've made something, because I like seeing other people run something that I've put together. I like seeing how they interpret what tools I've given them.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is some of the surprises that you've gotten from doing that?
Well, I made a mimic eyeball for Dungeons and Dragons, and then I had someone put a bunch of them in a jar, like different jars, so they just like looked at you as you walked by, which was a horrifying visual, but freaking amazing. Like, but also, so that was the moment where it's like, I'm glad I'm a player, but I also don't want to be a player right now.
Yeah. Did you know what was going on?
I did, and the other players didn't, because I was like, "Is that?" And they're like, "Yes, yes, they are." And I'm like, "Nope." Not. So my character, like, I was like, this is probably the only out of character thing I'm going to do. Yeah. I'm going to stay outside. Because the whole concept of them was like they tried to like burrow into heads and stuff. So I'm like,
oh, so they want to replace your eyes?
Yes.
And what happens when they replace your eyes?
They essentially connect to your brain and form a psychic connection and the ability to talk to you.
Nice. How hard is it to get rid of one of those?
I mean, you can try. It's not impossible, and it's not necessarily super difficult because they don't have a super high health. But if you do it forcefully and without very much caution, you'll take some damage, and it could be like, I even put in the rules, it's up to the GM's like prerogative, but it could be like a maximum reduction of your health.
Yeah, you're definitely losing an eye.
Yes. And the mimic would be moving fast enough to replace it, and like, so there wouldn't be long enough time for there to be like the nerve damage. The mimic would be almost recovering it and then giving you an eye, because you could still see out of the mimic eye because it was connected to you. But if you're pulling it out and injuring it again, that's a whole separate thing, and then it becomes a magical injury.
Sounds like you just have to come to grips with this new pet.
Yes, basically.
Can you turn a mimic eye into a familiar? That's what I need to know.
Honestly, probably, because they're not written as evil. They're written as neutral because it's almost a mix of primal with intelligence. They are intelligent creatures, but they're also hungry. And then after they've replaced it, it could be satiated as long as you're not like, get out of my face, get out of my face, get out of my face.
Oh, so they eat the eye.
Yes.
So when they get hungry again, There's another eye really close by.
Yep.
Oh, that
I hope it
sucks.
doesn't get hungry. Yeah. And it's they do have like the eye can open up to like a small mouth, so you could feed it, which is another really weird thing. Like seeing an eyeball open up with teeth, terrifying.
Oh, I'm loving that visual. Like you're sitting in the tavern, you're chowing away, and you're like, some for me, some for you.
Dude, yep.
That, oh my god. I hope you have that art someplace of someone feeding their eye mimic.
Yeah, I'll post that up later. It's disgusting.
That is disgusting.
It's good.
That is definitely good. Like I want to use that now. Where can I find an eye mimic?
So I have that up on Patreon as a free post. So
Okay.
I'll send you a link for that. Because it's statted and everything. There's a little bit of lore behind it. I think if you have a good relationship with you, it gives you like a limited view true sight, which is like one of the benefits of having it. But also you have to like pass a check when it initially eats your eye so that you don't get really hurt.
Yeah, so Dave wants to know, could it read other languages or have dark vision?
I'd say absolutely. I think it'd be even cooler if people saw that and were like, well, you know what? Maybe there's different types of eyeball mimics. Maybe this one was did spend its time in the dark, so it adapted to dark vision. That's terrifying. I am 100% here for it.
Yeah, I love it. I just like the idea of the players encountering someone feeding their eyeball. Or two. I mean, maybe you have a pair. I don't know.
That'd be horrifying, having the two different ones replace. I didn't even consider people having.
How does that interact with a beholder? You've raised a lot of questions for me here, Gabe.
You better hope that beholder's eye is its original one.
So it's like, so now I'm envisioning a beholder with these 10 eye stalks with these eyes that open up into little mouths.
Yep. And like it's entirely plausible because the whole point is they just replace eyes that they can get to. So a beholder could be basically a prisoner of like 10 eyeball mimics that are consistently telling it what to do.
Yeah, because beholders are already really stable.
Yep. Yep.
All those conflicting voices. I don't know. You've given me a lot to think about here with the eyeball mimic.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, nice. What was the inspiration for that?
I don't actually know. I might have had a nightmare about it and then like blocked it out because I thought about it when I woke up one morning. I was like, that's disgusting.
What if my eyes aren't really eyes, they're mimics?
What if like something ate my eyeball while I was asleep and now this isn't my eyeball? All right.
Dave says another way for the beholders to procreate, they could have baby beholders being the eyeballs, I believe.
That would actually make, yeah, that could work. And it's like creating it inside of the creature that they take hold of.
Elfbait, gibbering mouther as a nest of them.
Oh, that's horrifying.
Yeah, see, beholder, that leaves us with some questions. Is like, can they still use their eye rays if they, if they have a mimic eyeball as opposed to their regular eyeball, which each GM can figure out for themselves. But a gibbering mouther, I don't think would have that same problem.
We hope.
They would just be gibbering mouthers, but they might have a bunch of insane eyeball mimics, having listened to gibbering for however long.
Nope.
So what happened with the jars of eyeball mimics? What did they do with them?
So what turned out to be the case was there was a hag, and the hag had already had an eye replaced. And so the jar were essentially their like kin, their siblings, that the hag was finding new homes for them.
Oh, that's twisted. That's good.
Yeah. Fireballed the house.
She's like Oprah, except for cars, you're getting eyeball mimics.
You get an eyeball. You get an eyeball. You get an eyeball.
Oh, that's the worst game show, or that's the worst talk show ever.
We ended up literally fireballing the house like two of us had fireball and we did it at the same time.
Yeah, some things do need to be fireballed. But I'm sure many of them probably survived and made it out. What are some other monsters you came up with? Anything as bizarre as the eyeball mimic?
Oh, always. Always. I really like mimics. So one thing that I did come up with was a mimic heart that's essentially a variant to like the idea of vampires. Because when the heart stops pumping, like it can't flow blood through the body. So if there's a mimic heart that ate the heart of another creature and then replaced it, that's why they would need to consume blood. So they could consume blood so that they had new blood to pump through the body and keep it fresh and working and functional. But the reason with that being the case, it also makes sense why when people like say a stake through the heart, so people would confuse them for vampires, even though they weren't actually. They were just horrible other creatures that were basically just moving around, walking, like piloting bodies without people even knowing.
So how does the heart get into it to replace the heart?
It eats its way through.
Oh, so they have a big gaping hole in their chest.
Yes.
You know, it's not something you can't fix with a tunic or a vest.
Yeah, you can just cover it. Easy. And or if they're wearing armor, it's even better.
Yeah.
But
They could store stuff in there.
Yeah. But there's different ways that people could approach it. Like there's in fantasy we see dragons who have like almost like a gem in their chest or something. So it could be like the gem is like a hardened shell to the mimic's heart, just cover it, like protecting itself as it evolves and gets stronger and consumes more blood, and it's like hardened blood in the front.
Oh yeah. Or you have people like walking around town that have bolted metal plates to the front of their chest. Like, that's weird.
Yep.
It's what a weird custom.
It's a whole thing. Nobody knows why. They've just always been doing it.
Yeah.
Just kind of twisting their head 180 degrees. I made a were-shark subclass because I just wanted to be a were-shark.
I feel like every DM makes a were-shark at some point.
Yeah. We need them.
We need them. Well, especially if you grow up, was it the 90s with the street sharks?
Yep. Yep.
That is where were-sharks come from.
Yeah, it really is.
So we are coming up on the hour mark. As usual, folks, in the pinned comment, you can find links to check out Gabe across the web. Please do. I want to thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And final words before we head on out?
Keep making things and keep making sure that you have fun doing the things you do.
Awesome. So until next time, stay nerdy.